The cameras were rolling. The audience was laughing. And America believed it was watching the brightest stars in Hollywood living perfect lives. But behind the applause, something darker was unfolding. Some of the biggest legends ever to sit beside Johnny Carson were secretly battling addiction, exhaustion, paranoia, and emotional collapse. Pills, alcohol, cocaine, and fear hid beneath expensive smiles and designer suits. Tonight, we uncover the hidden pain behind 8 unforgettable icons of entertainment history. Number 1. Carrie Fisher. The audience inside the NBC studio exploded with excitement the moment Johnny Carson announced her name. America saw a fearless princess, the sharp-witted star who had become a global sensation after conquering Hollywood with space-age fame. But backstage, far away from the cheers and flashing cameras, a completely different reality was unfolding. In the dressing room, Carrie Fisher paced back and forth in restless circles, unable to sit still for even a few seconds. Her heartbeat thundered violently inside her chest while nervous energy rushed through her veins like electricity. A small mirror rested on the vanity table beside scattered makeup brushes and half-finished drinks. Just minutes earlier, she had taken another line of cocaine, desperate to maintain the confidence and fast-moving charm the public expected from her. The drug worked quickly. Her thoughts accelerated until everything around her seemed unnaturally sharp. The lights looked brighter. The sounds of the audience felt louder. Every movement in the room demanded her attention at once. Cocaine gave her the illusion of total control while quietly pulling her mind toward panic and exhaustion. When she stepped onto the stage beside Johnny Carson, the audience saw intelligence, humor, and confidence. She fired off jokes with rapid precision, making the crowd roar with laughter. To millions watching at home, she appeared unstoppable. But Carson noticed details others missed. Every few moments, Carrie subtly touched her nose or sniffed lightly between sentences. Her hands kept moving nervously across her lap. Her eyes darted constantly around the studio as if searching for danger hiding somewhere in the crowd. Number 2. Sammy Davis Jr. Whenever Johnny Carson welcomed Sammy Davis Jr. onto the Tonight Show stage, the atmosphere inside the studio instantly transformed. The orchestra played louder, the audience clapped harder, and the cameras rushed to capture every second of his explosive energy. Sammy didn't simply walk onto the stage. He danced onto it like a man powered by endless electricity. His smile looked unstoppable, his jokes arrived rapid fire, and his charm could light up an entire room within seconds, but behind the dazzling performance was a man slowly destroying himself to keep that energy alive. Backstage before the show, the real Sammy Davis Jr. looked nothing like the superstar America adored. Alone inside the dressing room, he sat hunched over in silence while cigarette smoke drifted through the air. The exhaustion in his face was impossible to hide. Years of non-stop performing, broken relationships, heavy drinking, and emotional loneliness had begun to crush him physically and mentally. Yet the audience could never be allowed to see weakness. Not from Mr. Show Business. On the cluttered vanity table beside a half-empty glass of brandy rested the chemicals helping him survive another night. Cocaine had become his fuel. The stimulant rushed through his bloodstream, forcing his exhausted body awake and creating the illusion of confidence and limitless energy. The effect was immediate. His heart raced violently. Sweat formed across his forehead. His thoughts sped up until his body almost vibrated with restless movement. By the time he stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, the drugs had fully taken hold. Sitting beside Johnny Carson, Sammy constantly shifted in his chair, crossed and uncrossed his legs, waved his hands dramatically, and laughed louder than anyone else in the room. The audience saw excitement and charisma. Carson saw something darker hiding underneath. Number 3. Elizabeth Taylor. The studio lights inside NBC burned brightly as assistants rushed across the Tonight Show set preparing for another unforgettable night with Johnny Carson. The audience waited eagerly for one of the most glamorous women in Hollywood history. To America, Elizabeth Taylor was royalty, a woman surrounded by diamonds, luxury, fame, and beauty beyond imagination. But hidden behind the elegance and legendary violet eyes was a private struggle that few people truly understood. Backstage, the atmosphere inside Elizabeth Taylor's dressing room felt strangely cold and silent. Sitting alone in front of a cluttered vanity mirror, she stared down at several prescription bottles scattered beside expensive perfume and makeup. Years of physical pain, emotional exhaustion, surgeries, and dependence on medication had slowly trapped her in a dangerous cycle. Painkillers and alcohol had become the only way she knew how to silence the constant discomfort inside her body and mind. A few minutes before airtime, Elizabeth swallowed several opioid painkillers with a quick drink of vodka, barely reacting to the bitterness anymore. It had become routine. The chemicals slowly spread through her system, numbing the pain and wrapping her thoughts in a heavy artificial calm. Her breathing softened. Her muscles relaxed. The tension disappeared from her face, replaced by the distant expression of someone drifting away from reality. But the drugs came with a price. When the stage manager announced it was time, Elizabeth stood carefully from her chair, using every ounce of focus to steady herself. The medication had blurred her balance, making every step feel strangely weightless. By the time she walked onto the Tonight Show stage, the audience erupted into thunderous applause. To millions watching at home, she looked graceful and composed. But Johnny Carson immediately sensed something unusual. Number 4 Chevy Chase. By the mid-1980s, Chevy Chase had become one of the biggest comedy stars in America. From blockbuster films to his legendary years on Saturday Night Live, audiences loved his sarcastic charm, effortless confidence, and cool attitude. Whenever he appeared beside Johnny Carson, viewers expected sharp jokes, clever insults, and the familiar arrogance that made Chevy Chase famous. But beneath that confident exterior was a man quietly fighting pain, addiction, and emotional collapse. Backstage before the show, the mood inside Chevy's dressing room was tense and silent. He stood carefully in front of the mirror, trying not to twist his back the wrong way. Years of dangerous physical comedy and painful stunt falls had left permanent damage to his spine. The pain never truly disappeared. Every movement felt stiff, heavy, and exhausting. But as a Hollywood superstar, he believed weakness could never be shown publicly. On the table beside him rested two things that had become part of his daily survival routine: opioid painkillers and cocaine. First came the pills. Powerful pain medication dulled the agony shooting through his lower back and legs, allowing him to stand upright without visibly suffering. But the drugs also slowed his body down, making him feel tired, emotionally numb, and mentally distant. To fight that sluggish feeling and recover his famous sharp personality, Chevy turned to cocaine. The stimulant hit fast, flooding his brain with artificial energy. Confidence and aggression, the combination created a dangerous balance. When Chevy finally walked onto the Tonight Show stage, the audience cheered loudly as always. Hands in his pockets, chin slightly raised, he carried himself like a man completely in control. But Johnny Carson noticed something the cameras couldn't fully hide. Chevy's movements looked unusually stiff. Number 5 Judy Garland. The moment Johnny Carson announced the arrival of Judy Garland, the Tonight Show audience erupted into applause powerful enough to shake the studio walls. To millions of Americans, Judy Garland wasn't simply a celebrity. She was a living symbol of Hollywood's golden age, the unforgettable voice behind timeless films and emotional performances that had shaped an entire generation. But by the late 1960s, the woman stepping behind that velvet curtain was no longer the healthy young star audiences remembered. Backstage, Judy stood trembling quietly in front of a dressing room mirror, her thin hands gripping the edge of the vanity for balance. Years of addiction, exhaustion, emotional trauma, and endless pressure from Hollywood studios had destroyed her physically. Since childhood, she had been given pills to keep her awake during exhausting film shoots and different pills to force her to sleep afterward. Decades later, her body no longer knew how to function without chemicals controlling it, spread across the vanity table were small bottles of stimulants and sedatives, the dangerous combination that had become the center of her life. Before going on stage, Judy swallowed several pills quickly, hoping they would work together long enough for her to survive another television appearance. The stimulants pushed artificial energy into her exhausted system, while the sedatives attempted to calm the fear and anxiety constantly racing through her mind. When she finally stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, the audience saw a fragile but beloved legend smiling beneath the bright studio lights. But Johnny Carson immediately noticed how weak she looked. Her body seemed painfully thin. Her movements were shaky and uncertain. Instead of confidently greeting the audience, Judy clung tightly to Carson's hand as though she needed help simply remaining upright. Number 6. Richard Pryor. Whenever Johnny Carson introduced Richard Pryor on The Tonight Show, the entire studio atmosphere changed instantly. The audience leaned forward with excitement, knowing they were about to witness one of the funniest and most unpredictable entertainers in America. Richard Pryor wasn't polished or controlled like traditional television stars. He exploded onto the stage with wild energy, fearless honesty, and humor so intense that people laughed until they could barely breathe. But behind that explosive brilliance was a man spiraling deeper into addiction every single night. Backstage before the show, Richard moved rapidly around the dressing room, unable to relax or stay still. His thoughts raced uncontrollably while nervous energy surged through his body like electricity. Cocaine had become more than a party drug in his life. It had become fuel, escape, confidence, and destruction all at once. During that period, Richard was heavily involved with freebase cocaine, an extremely dangerous form of the drug that produced an intense but short-lived high capable of pushing users into paranoia and emotional chaos. Minutes before stepping on stage, he had smoked another dose. The effect hit instantly. His heart pounded violently against his chest. Sweat formed across his forehead. Sounds became distorted. Every emotion intensified until his brain felt overloaded with speed, fear, and artificial confidence. Cocaine convinced him he was unstoppable while quietly tearing apart his body and mind underneath. When Richard Pryor walked beside Johnny Carson under the bright NBC studio lights, the audience exploded with laughter before he even sat down. He moved fast, talked faster, and fired jokes in every direction. To viewers at home, he looked fearless and electrifying. But Carson noticed the warning signs hiding beneath the comedy. Richard's eyes darted constantly around the room as if searching for danger. Number 7. Liza Minnelli. The second Johnny Carson introduced Liza Minnelli, the NBC studio erupted with excitement. The orchestra burst into lively music while the audience clapped wildly for one of the most energetic performers in Hollywood. Liza entered the stage like a hurricane of charm and movement, waving enthusiastically and flashing the enormous smile that had made her one of entertainment's brightest stars. To viewers at home, she looked fearless, glamorous, and overflowing with life, but behind the makeup, sequin clothing, and non-stop energy was a woman fighting anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and growing dependence on pills and alcohol. Backstage before the show, Liza's dressing room was filled with nervous tension rather than celebration. She paced around the room trying to calm herself while repeatedly glancing toward the mirror. Fame had followed her since childhood as the daughter of Judy Garland, and the pressure of living beneath such a legendary shadow constantly haunted her. Deep inside, she feared disappointing audiences, critics, and even herself. On the vanity table beside scattered makeup brushes sat a glass of white wine and a bottle of Valium. The sedative had become one of the only ways she could silence the anxiety roaring through her mind before major appearances. But the medication slowed her body down, making her feel heavy, sleepy, and emotionally numb. To fight that sluggish feeling and maintain her energetic public image, she mixed alcohol with sheer willpower, forcing herself into a state of exaggerated excitement. By the time she walked onto the Tonight Show stage, the chemical battle inside her body had already begun. Sitting beside Johnny Carson, Liza talked rapidly, laughed loudly, and moved constantly in her chair. Her arms waved dramatically while she leaned forward during stories, grabbed Carson's hand during jokes, and bounced between emotions almost too quickly to follow. Number 8. Burt Reynolds. When Johnny Carson introduced Burt Reynolds, the Tonight Show audience erupted with excitement. In the late 70s and 80s, Burt Reynolds was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, the rugged leading man with a confident smile, effortless charm, and a screen presence that defined masculinity for an entire generation. To the public, he was untouchable, successful, and always in control, but behind that polished image was a man quietly breaking down under pain, exhaustion, and dependence on sleeping pills. Backstage before the show, Burt moved slowly in front of the mirror, struggling with simple movements. Years of injuries from action roles and stunts had left his body constantly in pain, especially in his jaw and back. The pain was not occasional, it was constant, sharp, and draining. Sleeping had become difficult, and even resting offered no real relief. On the vanity table sat a small orange bottle of strong sleeping pills. They were meant to help him rest, but over time they had become something far more dangerous. Burt would take them not just to sleep, but to escape the constant physical suffering that followed him everywhere. The pills dulled the pain, but also slowed his mind, clouded his thinking, and left him in a fog-like state. Minutes before going on stage, he swallowed a dose. The effect was immediate. His body felt heavy, disconnected, and detached from reality. His thoughts slowed down while his senses dulled. To counter the sedative effect and appear alert on live television, he relied on sheer willpower and years of performance experience to hold himself together. When he stepped onto the Tonight Show stage beside Johnny Carson, the audience cheered loudly. Burt still carried himself like a movie star, relaxed posture, half smile, confident presence. But Carson noticed something was off almost immediately. His movements were slower than usual.